My son-in-law stood in the living room accusing me of stealing his family's keepsakes, yelling, "Thief, get out," right in front of my grandkids. My daughter wouldn't even look at me. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out a little camera, and when they saw what it had recorded, every single face in that room went blank. They called me a thief, right in front of my own grandchildren. My son-in-law, Mark, stood there, his voice dripping with venom, practically spitting the word at me. My daughter, Sarah, just stood there, pale and silent, her gaze fixed on the floor. It felt like my heart was being ripped out. But oh, how their faces drained of color, turning as white as ghosts, when I pulled out the hidden camera footage, proving everything. Honestly, I never thought I'd be the type, you know? At 65, buying a hidden camera feels like something out of a detective show, not for an elderly widow like me from our quiet town. But there I was, standing in an electronics store, nodding along as the salesman, who looked barely older than my grandson, Ben, spouted all these technical terms. "Mrs. Miller," he'd say, "this model has a motion sensor. The battery lasts a full week." He held up this tiny device, no bigger than a button. "You said you want to keep an eye on your cat when you're away?" he asked, smiling. The lie came surprisingly easy to me. Much easier than admitting I suspected my own son-in-law of theft. "Yes," I chirped, "my Oscar is far too curious. He gets into everything when I'm not home." The truth? I don't even have a cat. All I have is an empty house, too quiet since Arthur died 3 years ago, and this nagging, awful feeling that something was deeply wrong in my daughter Sarah's life. Our town isn't huge, but it's not tiny either. My house on Elm Street has been here for 50 years. Arthur bought it right after we got married, full of dreams and plans. I remember painting the walls together, planting those young trees in the yard, and then bringing our newborn Sarah home. Now, the trees are giants. The house, like me, is worn by time. Sarah lives on the other side of town with Mark, a man I can barely stand, and my 2 wonderful grandchildren, Ben and Lily. I see them less often than I'd like. It was a cool April morning. I paid for the camera, tucked the box into my bag, and stepped back out onto the street. The wind from the bay chilled me to the bone, making me pull my old wool coat tighter. On days like this, my knee ached more than usual, a constant reminder of that fall last winter. I walked slowly, past the shop windows, my mind racing. How had my life come to this? To a point where I felt I had to spy on my own family? It all started with $200. I remember clearly putting it in my wallet before heading to Sarah and Mark's for Christmas. It was for the kids, you see. I wanted to give them cash so they could pick out whatever they wanted. But when it was time for gifts, my wallet was just empty. I tore through the guest room, my purse, even my coat pockets. Nothing. The money was gone. "You probably left it at home, Mom," Sarah said, her eyes flitting away from mine. "You've been forgetting things a lot lately." That wasn't true. Yes, I sometimes misplaced my glasses or keys, but I've always been meticulous with money. 32 years working at a bank had taught me that much. "I'll give the kids their presents," Mark interjected, almost ostentatiously, pulling out his wallet. "Don't worry about it, Eleanor." There was always this condescending edge to his voice when he spoke to me, like I wasn't his wife's mother, but some senile child. Mark Price, 42 years old, a long-haul truck driver with a perpetually tired look and a habit of shaking hands too firmly, as if he needed to prove something. I never understood what Sarah saw in him, apart from his undeniable good looks. At the time, I just kept quiet. I didn't want to ruin Christmas for my grandchildren. Ben, 10, and little Lily, only 8, watched with wide eyes, sensing the tension. They each got a measly $20 from Mark and thanked him uncertainly, clearly disappointed. That evening, lying in the guest room, wallpapered in the cheerful pattern Sarah had picked out for her nursery before she married, I wondered for the first time, what if Mark took my money? The thought felt absurd. Sarah said he earned good money. Why would he steal from his elderly mother-in-law? But the seed of doubt had been sown. And after that, I started noticing other oddities. Sarah, who had been so lively and cheerful in her youth, now spoke quietly, often glancing back at her husband as if seeking approval for every word. My phone calls went unanswered more and more often. Invitations to visit became rare and always coincided with Mark's work trips. He was always so sorry he couldn't be there. Then, during a visit in March, I found someone had rummaged through my bag. My things weren't where I'd left them, and my wallet was open. This time, no money was missing. It just felt wrong. I became more careful. But the feeling of invasion, that unsettling violation. Coffee, Mom. Sarah walked into the living room without knocking, making me jump. She looked utterly exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. Thank you, dear. Is everything all right? Of course, she replied, too quickly. I just didn't get much sleep. Lily was coughing all night. I knew that wasn't true. My room was next to the nursery, and I hadn't heard a peep. But I didn't call her out. After that visit, I started noticing how Mark would watch me intently when he thought I wasn't looking. How he'd ask questions about my house, about valuables, about the insurance policy Arthur left behind. Grandma, do you have that old jewelry? Lily asked me one day, sitting on my lap. Dad said you have some beautiful jewelry that belonged to my great-grandmother. I froze. My grandmother's jewelry was indeed in my possession. Not particularly valuable in monetary terms, but absolutely priceless in sentiment. I had never mentioned it to Mark. Dad said that. I asked cautiously. Yes. He told Mom you were probably hiding it and didn't want to share. Sarah, who had overheard, turned pale and snapped at her daughter. Lily, go to your room. The look she gave me then, a mixture of fear and shame, convinced me something was terribly wrong in that house. I thought about it all the way home on the bus, watching the streets fly by. I thought about it opening the door to my empty house. I thought about it while cooking dinner for one. Arthur would have known what to do. He always knew how to resolve difficult situations. But Arthur was gone. And now it was up to me. That evening, wrapped in a blanket in my armchair by the window, I made a decision. The next time I visited my daughter and my things or money went missing, I was going to find out who was responsible. And now, this tiny camera was in my bag. I felt like a spy from one of Arthur's old movies. Ridiculous, embarrassing, but absolutely necessary. At home, I pulled out the device and started studying the instructions. The letters were tiny, so I had to put on my reading glasses. The technical terms were confusing, but I got the basics. Motion activated, records to a memory card, viewable on a computer. A computer. Another problem. I had an old laptop Sarah had given me years ago, mostly for photos and news. Could I even view the recordings? You'll figure it out, Eleanor, I said aloud, startled at how often I talked to myself since Arthur's death. You're not that old. For the next 2 days, I practiced. I set it up in different spots in my bedroom, checked viewing angles, learned to download and watch the footage. Several times, I almost threw the whole thing in the trash out of sheer frustration. But stubbornness has always been my strong suit. By Friday, I felt like an expert. Or at least, a confident user. Just in time, Sarah called with an invitation for Sunday lunch. Mark will be home, she said quietly. He wants to talk to you about something important. Her voice sounded strange, but when I asked if everything was okay, she quickly changed the subject. On Sunday morning, I packed a small overnight bag. Sarah had insisted I stay. I tucked a change of clothes, toiletries, medication, and, of course, my camera carefully into my makeup bag. Their house was in a newer part of town, a typical suburban cottage with a neat lawn and children's bikes on the driveway. Just like dozens of others on that street, faceless to my taste. Nothing like our old house on Elm Street, where every crack in the wall held a story. Sarah opened the door before I could even ring the bell. She looked nervous, but tried to smile. Mom, I'm so glad you're here. Her hug was tight, almost desperate. I could smell her shampoo, the same kind she'd used as a teenager. Is something wrong, dear? I asked quietly. No, of course not, she replied, too quickly. Come in. The kids have been asking for you. Ben and Lily burst into the hallway, happy and noisy. Ben, tall for his 11 years, with serious eyes so like Arthur's, and Lily, covered in freckles, her 2 pigtails bouncing with every movement. Grandma, did you bring anything? Lily. Sarah scolded. That's not how you ask. It's okay, I smiled, pulling 2 small packages from my bag. Of course I did. A book for Ben. He loved adventure stories, and a set of colored pencils for Lily, who inherited my love of drawing. Thank you, Grandma, Ben said ceremoniously, his eyes already lit up by the book. Lily just threw herself into my arms, hugging me tightly. Her small, warm body pressed against mine, and for a moment, everything became simple and clear. For these children, it was worth enduring the tension I felt in this house. Kids, go to your rooms. Mark's low voice came from the doorway. Let Grandma rest from her trip. He stood leaning against the doorframe, tall, dark hair slightly graying at the temples. Outwardly, he was an attractive man, if not for the cold look he gave me. Hello, Mark, I said, straightening up. Years of working with clients at the bank had taught me to remain calm in front of unpleasant people. Eleanor, he nodded, not moving. I hope the trip was okay. Fine, thank you. I'll take your things to the guest room, Sarah interjected, grabbing my bag. You and Mark talk while I do that. My heart pounded. The camera was in my bag. But refusing my daughter's help would only raise suspicion. Of course, dear. Thank you. Sarah quickly left with my bag, leaving me alone with my son-in-law. My heart was thumping. If he finds out about the camera, come into the living room, Mark said, motioning for me to follow. We really need to talk. I followed, wondering what he wanted to discuss. Money? The house? Arthur's insurance? But the conversation turned out to be about something else entirely. When I finally made it to the guest room late that night, I was relieved to find the camera still safely tucked away in my makeup bag. Carefully, trying not to make a sound, I set it up between the books on the shelf. The perfect angle to see the whole room, and especially the spot where I usually left my bag. Tomorrow, I would find out the truth. The morning began with the smell of pancakes and children's laughter. I lay in the guest room, listening to the sounds of the house waking up. Today was Ben's 11th birthday. 11 years ago, I held him for the first time in the maternity ward, small, red, and screaming. Arthur had tears in his eyes, though he denied it later. Something just got in my eye, Eleanor, he'd said, wiping his cheeks surreptitiously. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. The weather had decided to give the birthday boy a present. I slowly sat up, feeling my joints ache. At 65, every morning, your body reminds you of the years you've lived. I reached for my glasses on the nightstand and glanced involuntarily at the bookshelf. My little camera was still there, inconspicuous among the worn volumes. Grandma, are you awake? The door flew open and Lily rushed in, already dressed in her frilly party dress. Mom said you should come have breakfast. Good morning, sunshine, I smiled, watching her jump up and down with excitement. Tell Mom I'll be there in 10 minutes. And Dad said we're having guests tonight. Lily continued chattering. And a big cake. Ben will make a wish. He will, I nodded. Now let Grandma get dressed. Okay. When Lily ran off, I went to the window. The view of the neighbors' neat houses, trimmed lawns, and parked cars looked so peaceful. It was hard to believe that behind this facade of prosperity, something was happening in my daughter's house. Something that made Sarah look exhausted and Mark more irritable than usual. Yesterday's conversation with him had been strange. I'd expected questions about money, but Mark talked about work, about a promotion he'd been promised, about plans to buy a new car, as if he was trying to convince me, or himself, of his financial stability. Everything's going great, Eleanor, he'd repeated. Soon, we'll even be able to send the kids to private school. But something in his eyes didn't match his words. Anxiety? Fear? I couldn't quite put my finger on it. After getting dressed, I hid the memory card from the camera in a secret pocket in my purse. Better to keep it with me than leave it in the room. The kitchen greeted me with the aroma of coffee and lively bustle. Sarah was working her magic at the stove. Ben was setting the table and Lily was hanging colorful paper garlands, standing on a chair. Happy birthday, dear, I hugged my grandson, feeling him press against me for a moment before pulling away. He was already shy about showing affection. He was growing up. Thanks, Grandma, he muttered, returning to setting the table. Mom, coffee? Sarah turned to me, and I noticed the bruise under her eye, which she was trying to cover with makeup. My heart ached. I knew that look. Asterisk, don't look. Don't ask. Everything's fine, asterisk a look she had learned to use over the years of her marriage to Mark. I'd love to, dear. Can I help you with anything? No, you're a guest, she replied, too quickly. Just sit with the kids. We had breakfast without Mark. According to Sarah, he'd gone to a bakery on the other side of town to get the holiday cake. His absence eased the tension. The children talked louder, and Sarah even smiled a few times. Grandma, did you bring me a present? Ben asked when he'd finished his pancakes. Ben, Sarah scolded. That's not how you ask. It's okay, I ruffled the boy's hair. Of course I did, but let's wait until tonight when all the guests are here. The gift was actually hidden in my bag, a kit for building a radio-controlled model airplane. Ben was fascinated by technology, and I'd had to save quite a bit from my modest pension to make my grandson happy. After breakfast, the children ran off to get ready for the party, and Sarah and I were left alone in the kitchen. She washed the dishes silently, avoiding my gaze. Sarah, I said quietly, using her childhood nickname. What's going on? And don't tell me everything's fine. Her hands froze in the soapy water. For a moment, I thought she was about to cry, but Sarah just sighed deeply. It's just stress, Mom. Lots of work at the hospital, the kids, the house. You know how it is. And the bruise under your eye, I pressed, that's from stress, too? She flinched as if struck. I bumped into the closet door. My own clumsiness. A lie so obvious it hurt to hear it. My daughter, who as a child could never lie without blushing and stammering, now uttered these words with frightening ease. Sarah, if you need help. The front door slammed, interrupting our conversation. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Mark appeared in the kitchen, holding a large cardboard box with a bakery logo on it. The cake's here, he announced with feigned cheerfulness. Hi, Eleanor. Have you had breakfast yet? Yes, thank you, I replied, watching Sarah instantly transform. She straightened her back, forced a smile, and began fussing with the coffee pot. Honey, would you like some coffee or breakfast? I can heat up the pancakes. Coffee, he said curtly, placing the box on the table. Black. I need to check the barbecue before tonight. The Smiths are coming at 5. I thought the party was at 4, Sarah said uncertainly. I moved it. I have things to do, Mark snapped. And tell the kids to keep it down. My head is splitting. He picked up his coffee mug and walked out to the backyard without looking at his wife or me. Sarah's shoulders slumped, as if the air had been let out of her. He's just tired, she muttered, though I hadn't asked her anything. He works a lot. I didn't say anything. What could I say? That I could see how afraid she was of him? That I remembered how happy and confident she had been before she met him? That Arthur would be turning in his grave, seeing how his daughter was being treated? Instead, I just put my hand on her shoulder. I'll go see what the kids are doing. The day dragged on. The children tried to be quiet, playing board games in Ben's room. I joined them, listening to their whispers and muffled laughter. Sarah prepared the festive dinner while Mark disappeared into the garage, went out into the yard, and locked himself in his study, talking on the phone too quietly for me to make out the words. At 3 o'clock, I went up to the guest room, pretending to rest before the guests arrived. In reality, I needed to check the camera. It was still in place, but the angle had changed slightly. Had someone moved the books? I quickly adjusted the device and returned to the children. By 5 o'clock, the guests began to arrive. The Smiths are neighbors, with their son who is Ben's classmate. 2 of Sarah's colleagues from the hospital with their husbands. Lily's elderly teacher, Mrs. Peterson, who is some distant relative of Mark's. A total of 12 adults and 5 children. The party was held in the backyard. Mark grilled meat on the barbecue, playing the role of the hospitable host. Sarah bustled about with snacks and drinks. The children played badminton on the lawn. I sat in a wicker chair, watching this spectacle of happy family life. None of the guests seemed to notice Sarah's forced smiles, Mark's sharp movements, or the frightened glances the children cast at their father when he raised his voice. Nice party, isn't it? Mrs. Peterson, a dry old lady with piercing eyes, sat down next to me. Ben has grown so much in the last year. Yes, they're both growing up too fast, I agreed. How are you, Eleanor? Is it hard being alone after Arthur? The question was direct, but not tactless. At her age, over 70, you don't waste time on social niceties. I'm getting used to it, I replied honestly. One day at a time. I understand, she nodded. My Harold passed away 15 years ago. Sometimes I still talk to him, can you imagine? I can, I smiled. Arthur is now my chief advisor on all matters. Mrs. Peterson chuckled and nodded toward Mark, who was laughing loudly at someone's joke. And what does Arthur think of your son-in-law? I froze, surprised by her directness. Why do you ask? She shrugged. Just curious. Mark, he's a complicated man. I've known him since he was a child. His father was the same, charming at first, then controlling. I didn't know how to respond. Mrs. Peterson seemed to have seen the same thing I had. But before I could gather my thoughts, Mark himself interrupted us. What are you whispering about, ladies? He asked, approaching with a glass of beer. I hope you're not gossiping about me. What are you talking about, Mark? Mrs. Peterson replied calmly. We were discussing the weather. Perfect for a barbecue, right? He smiled, but his eyes remained cold. Eleanor, could you help Sarah in the kitchen? I think she needs some help with the cake. It wasn't a request. It was an order. I slowly got up, feeling my knee ache. Of course. In the kitchen, Sarah was indeed busy with the cake. A huge chocolate structure with 11 candles. Mom, thanks for coming, she exhaled. I can't find the matches for the candles. Mark usually keeps them. She fell silent, opening and closing drawers. In the top cabinet, dear, Mark's voice came from the doorway. With my cigarettes, which you threw away last week. Sarah flinched. I thought you quit smoking. And I thought we didn't throw away each other's things, he retorted, walking into the kitchen. But I'm not angry, sweetheart. It's a holiday. He put his arms around her shoulders, too tightly, judging by the way she winced. I turned away, pretending to look for cake plates. By the way, Eleanor, Mark said to me. I found an old box in the attic. I think it's yours. With jewelry in it. I froze. My box? The one with my grandmother's jewelry that I'd left with Sarah for safekeeping a few years ago when I was renovating my house? Yes, I think it's mine, I replied cautiously. Can I take a look? Of course, he smiled. After the cake. It's in my study. Something in his tone made me wary. It was as if he was testing my reaction, waiting for something. The evening continued. Ben blew out the candles on the cake to the applause of the guests. Mark gave a touching speech about what a wonderful son Ben was growing up to be and how proud he was of him. From the outside, everything looked perfect. A happy family, a loving father. Only I could see how tense Sarah's shoulders were. How Ben's smile was forced as he received his father's approval, which was so rare on ordinary days. When the cake was eaten and the presents were handed out, I was glad my airplane had delighted Ben. The guests began to leave. The children went to their rooms, tired from the holiday. Sarah started cleaning up the kitchen. Come on, Eleanor. Mark appeared next to me as I folded the leftover napkins. I'll show you that box. I followed him into his study. A small room with a desk, a computer, and bookshelves filled with sports trophies and photographs of Mark with people in business suits. On the desk was my box, a carved wooden box my father had brought back from Europe after the war. It contained some inexpensive but memorable jewelry, my grandmother's silver bracelet, my mother's pearl brooch, and a pair of gold earrings Arthur had given me on our first anniversary. I found this the other day when I was looking for some old papers, Mark said, pushing the box toward me. I thought you might want it. I carefully took the box and immediately noticed the lock was broken. The small silver tongue that used to click shut with a distinctive sound was now hanging on a single screw. The lock was broken when I found it, Mark said quickly, watching my reaction. Probably a long time ago. A lie. I remembered clearly that the lock had been intact when I'd given the box to Sarah for safekeeping. And it wasn't just any lock. My father had specially installed a clever mechanism that could only be opened if you knew the secret. With my heart pounding, I opened the lid. The jewelry was there, but something was wrong. I sifted through them. The bracelet, the brooch, the earrings. The ring. Where was Arthur's wedding ring after he died? I'd kept it here, on a thin gold chain. Is something wrong? Mark asked, watching me closely. I slowly looked up. Should I tell him about the missing ring? Accuse him right now? No, not now. Not with Sarah and the children in the next room. No, everything's fine, I lied. I just haven't seen these things in a long time. Thanks for finding them. He nodded, but I noticed a strange look in his eyes. Disappointment? Relief? You can take it with you, he said casually. It's yours. Yes, of course, I said, clutching the box to my chest. I'll put it in my room. Leaving the study, I stopped in the hallway, trying to calm my breathing. Arthur's ring was gone. A gold ring with our initials and wedding date engraved inside. Not the most expensive, but priceless to me. In the guest room, I carefully examined the box. The lock wasn't just broken. It had been pried open. There were clear marks from a screwdriver or knife on the wood around it. I also noticed there was no dust inside. Someone had recently wiped the box down on the inside, but not on the outside. I sat down on the bed, still holding the box. Questions swirled in my head. Why did Mark need Arthur's wedding ring? Why that, and not something more valuable? And why did he decide to return the box now? There was a soft knock at the door. I quickly closed the box and hid it under my pillow. Come in. It was Sarah, with a cup of tea in her hands. I thought you might want some tea before bed, she said, placing the cup on the nightstand. How was your holiday? Wonderful, I replied. Ben was happy. She nodded, but her gaze was distant. Mom, she began, then fell silent, biting her lip. What is it, dear? Nothing, she shook her head. Just, thank you for coming. It means a lot to the children. She leaned in to hug me and whispered so softly I could barely hear her. Be careful with Mark. He's been out of sorts lately. Before I could respond, she straightened up and headed for the door. Good night, Mom. Good night, sweetie. When the door closed, I took the box from under my pillow and opened it again. In the dim light of the nightstand lamp, the jewelry glimmered faintly, reminding me of the past, of people who were no longer there, of happy moments that could never be recaptured. The broken lock on my old box, with the family jewelry, spoke louder than words. Something was very wrong in this house, and I had to find out what it was before it was too late. The morning was cloudy. I woke up to the muffled rumble of thunder in the distance. Outside the guest room window, heavy gray clouds covered the sky. Nature seemed to be warning of an approaching storm. The clock on the nightstand showed 7 in the morning, but voices could already be heard in the house. I slowly sat up, feeling a dull ache in my lower back, a sure sign of approaching rain. The jewelry box was still lying on the bedside table. The broken lock seemed to stare at me with silent reproach. Why hadn't I taken it earlier? Why had I entrusted it to my son-in-law, whom I never truly knew? The voices behind the door grew louder. I recognized Mark's irritated tone and Sarah's quiet, soothing voice. They were arguing, though I couldn't make out the words. Then the door slammed, and everything went quiet. I quickly got dressed, trying not to make any noise. A house dress, comfortable flat shoes, minimal makeup. At 65, you don't try to impress anyone anymore, especially in your own family. I combed my graying hair into a simple bun and, glancing at my reflection in a small mirror, thought about how quickly time flies. It seemed like only yesterday I was a young woman full of hopes and plans, and today I was a widow whom my own son-in-law considered a burden. Picking up the box, I went out into the hallway. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and something sweet wafted from the kitchen. Sarah was probably baking pancakes for the children, as she did every Sunday. Good morning, I said as I entered the kitchen. Sarah was standing at the stove, flipping pancakes. Ben and Lily were already sitting at the table, eating breakfast. Mark was nowhere to be seen. Good morning, Mom, Sarah replied without turning around. Her voice sounded tense. Coffee? I'd love some, I said, putting the box on the kitchen table and sitting down next to Lily, who immediately snuggled up to me. Grandma, are you leaving today? She asked. Yes, sweetie. The bus leaves at 2. But that's not for a while, the girl said happily. We'll have time to play. Ben chewed his pancake silently, avoiding my gaze. Something was wrong. Usually so talkative, today he seemed withdrawn, almost frightened. What's wrong, Ben? I asked, reaching across the table to touch his hand. Didn't get enough sleep? He flinched and pulled his hand away. Everything's fine, he muttered, not looking up. Sarah placed a cup of coffee and a plate of pancakes in front of me. I noticed that her hands were shaking. "Kids," she said in an unnaturally cheerful tone. "When you're done with breakfast, go to your rooms, okay? Your dad needs to talk to your grandmother." My stomach clenched. Asterisk, talk about what? About the box? About the missing ring, asterisk. "I'm almost done," Ben said hurriedly, finishing his juice. "Let's go, Lily." "But I'm not finished," the girl protested. "Let's go," he repeated insistently, grabbing his sister's hand. "I'll let you play with my new toy." The offer worked. Lily, forgetting her half-eaten pancake, jumped off the chair and followed her brother. At the door, she turned and waved at me. "See you soon, Grandma." When the children left, I turned to Sarah. "What's going on?" She sat down opposite me, still avoiding my gaze. "Mark," she began, but fell silent when she heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. A moment later, he entered the kitchen, tall, broad-shouldered, with a stony expression on his face. He was holding something wrapped in a handkerchief. "Good morning, Eleanor," he said with a fake smile. "Did you sleep well?" "Fine, thank you." I tried to sound calm, even though my heart was beating in my throat. "You wanted to talk to me?" "Yes." He sat down at the head of the table, placing the bundle in front of him. "About your jewelry box." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. Sarah froze in her chair, pale as a sheet. "When was the last time you opened it?" Mark asked. "Last night. When you gave it to me." "And everything was there?" He arched an eyebrow. "Not quite," I decided to be honest. "Arthur's wedding ring is missing." "I kept it on a chain." Mark nodded as if he had expected that answer. "You know, Eleanor, I've been noticing some strange things lately," he said slowly, drawing out his words. "Things going missing. First small things. Money from my wallet. Then Sarah's watch. Then her mother's earrings." "Mark." Sarah interrupted quietly. "Maybe you shouldn't." "Shut up," he snapped, and she cringed as if she'd been struck. "I'm going to take care of this once and for all." He turned to me, and I saw cold fury in his eyes. "And yesterday, I decided to check your jewelry box, Eleanor. And do you know what I found there?" He unfolded the handkerchief, and a gold ring with a small diamond flashed on the table. My mother's engagement ring, which disappeared a month ago. I stared at the ring, unable to believe my eyes. I had never seen it before. "It's not mine," I said firmly. "I never took your things, Mark. Don't lie to me." He slammed his fist on the table so hard that the cups jumped. "It was in your jewelry box. You took it when you stayed with us last month." "That's not true." I tried to remain calm, though I was trembling inside. "I'm not a thief, Mark. And you know that." "I know." He smiled bitterly. "All I know is that ever since Arthur died, you've been complaining about money. I know you're jealous of our house, of our life. I know you don't approve of me as your daughter's husband, and this is your way of getting back at us, by stealing our things." Sarah sobbed quietly, covering her face with her hands. I looked at her, expecting her to stand up for me, to say a word in my defense, but she remained silent. "Sarah," I said to my daughter, "you don't believe this, do you?" She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes, but before she could say anything, there was a rustling sound at the kitchen door. We all turned and saw Ben and Lily standing there, looking frightened at what was happening. "Dad," Ben said uncertainly. "What's going on?" Mark turned to the children, and his face changed instantly. Anger gave way to feigned sadness. "Kids, I'm very sorry, but I have something to tell you," he said, motioning them closer. "Remember Grandma Eleanor's ring that went missing? I found it, at your Grandma Eleanor's house." Lily looked at me in confusion. "Grandma took someone else's ring?" "No," I exclaimed. "Never, Mark. Don't get the kids involved in this." But he didn't seem to hear me. "Yes, Lily. Grandma Eleanor took things that didn't belong to her," he said gently, as if explaining a difficult concept. "Sometimes adults do bad things when they don't have enough money." "That's a lie." I jumped up from my chair, feeling the blood rush to my face. "I've never taken anything that didn't belong to me." "Mark, stop this right now." "See," he said to the children, ignoring me. "That's why I didn't want her to come so often. I knew something was wrong." Ben looked at me with horror and disbelief. Lily started to cry. But Grandma can't be a thief, she whispered through her tears. She's nice. Sometimes people aren't who they seem, sweetie. Mark patted her on the head. I'm so sorry. I felt the ground slip away beneath my feet. My own son-in-law was accusing me of theft in front of my grandchildren, and my daughter stood by silently, allowing it to happen. Sarah, I turned to her, my voice shaking. Tell them the truth. You've known me all my life. You know I would never. Mom, she finally said, her voice barely audible. Just admit it, please. It'll be easier for everyone. I froze, unable to believe my ears. My own daughter, flesh of my flesh, was betraying me. Agreeing with false accusations, depriving me of the last thing I had left, my grandchildren's respect. I will not confess to something I did not do, I said, feeling tears welling up in my throat. Never. Mark shook his head, feigning regret. Then I'm very sorry, Eleanor, but I have to ask you to leave right now. I can't allow you to stay in my house around my children. But Dad, Ben began. Grandma's bus is at 2. It doesn't matter, Mark cut him off. She'll find somewhere to go, won't you, Eleanor? I looked at them all. At Mark, triumphant. At Sarah, broken. At the frightened children. And felt something inside me die. Faith in family, hope for justice. I don't know what it was, but it was a pain I hadn't felt even after Arthur's death. I'm leaving, I said, standing up. But know this. I never took what wasn't mine. Never. I headed for the door, but stopped, turning back to the box on the table. This is mine, I said, taking it and pressing it tightly to my chest. And I'll prove my innocence, I promise. Mark smiled. Sure, Eleanor. Good luck with that. I walked past the children, trying not to look into their eyes, which were full of tears and confusion. I went up to the guest room and quickly gathered my things. The camera was still on the bookshelf, inconspicuous, but hopefully capturing everything that had happened in the room while I was away. Coming downstairs with my bag, I saw Sarah standing in the hallway. She was alone. Mark had taken the children to the living room. Mom, she whispered, I don't believe you're a thief. But Mark, he's so convincing. And they really did find the ring in your jewelry box, I said, looking her straight in the eye. Which someone broke into. You know, the lock was broken. You know I would never take something that didn't belong to me. I know, she lowered her gaze. But I can't do anything. He controls you, I finished for her. And you let him. You let him destroy our family, humiliate me in front of my grandchildren. How can you, Sarah? Tears rolled down her cheeks. You don't understand, Mom. You don't know what it's like. I do, I said, suddenly feeling so tired that even my anger receded. I know more than you think. And I'll help you, even if you didn't help me. I opened the front door. It had already started raining. A light, cold rain that penetrated to the bone. Perfect weather for the hardest day of my life. Goodbye, Sarah. Mom, wait. She grabbed my arm. Where are you going? It's raining, and the bus won't be here for hours. I'll find somewhere to go, I repeated Mark's words with bitter irony. Don't worry about me. Worry about your children, who are growing up watching their father mistreat their mother and humiliate their grandmother. I stepped out into the rain without looking back. My bag weighed heavily on my shoulder, and the box hidden inside seemed impossibly heavy. But the heaviest thing of all was my heart, broken by the betrayal of those closest to me. The streets were almost empty on that Sunday morning. The few passers-by hurried to take shelter from the rain, paying no attention to the elderly woman with a bag, slowly wandering along the sidewalk. I walked without looking where I was going, just trying to get as far away from my daughter's house as possible. 2 blocks away, I found a small cafe that was open despite the early hour. The bell jingled as I entered, and an elderly waitress behind the counter looked up. Terrible weather, isn't it? She said cheerfully. Please, have a seat wherever you like. I chose a table by the window, where I could see the rain turning the street into a blurry gray canvas. Like my life. Yesterday, it was bright and full of meaning. Today, it seemed colorless and shapeless. Coffee? The waitress asked, approaching with a notepad. Yes, please, I said without even looking at the menu. Can I use your phone? Of course, dear. She nodded toward the phone on the wall by the cash register. Is everything all right? I tried to smile, but it didn't come out right. Just a little family problem. Nothing serious. She nodded understandingly and walked away to get my coffee. I took a worn notebook out of my bag, where I kept important numbers. Among them was the number of Mr. Davies, my neighbor, a former police officer who sometimes gave me a ride from the supermarket and helped with minor repairs around the house. Maybe he could meet me at the bus station or, if I was lucky, even come and pick me up here. That would be better than sitting in a cafe until 2 o'clock and then spending another hour on a bus, wet and humiliated. I went to the phone and dialed the number. After the third ring, a familiar, gruff voice answered, Davies speaking. Mr. Davies, this is Eleanor Miller. I tried to speak evenly, but my voice betrayed me and trembled. Your neighbor from Elm Street, Eleanor? His voice sounded surprised. What happened? Are you all right? Not really, I sighed deeply. I'm in town at my daughter's. Well, not at my daughter's anymore. I need to get home, but the bus doesn't leave until 2. I thought maybe you could. Give me your address, he interrupted without hesitation. I'll come over. I felt tears of gratitude welling up in my throat. It's Jenny's Cafe, on the corner of Maple and 5th. But I don't want to trouble you. Maybe you could just meet me at the bus station. I'll be there in 40 minutes, he said firmly. Don't go anywhere. Returning to my table, I wrapped my hands around the hot coffee cup, trying to warm myself. My wet clothes clung to my body, and my gray hair had come out of its bun and hung in damp strands. I must have looked like a real city lunatic. What would Arthur say if he saw me like this? He would probably scold Mark first, then Sarah, and then hug me and say, Eleanor, old girl, don't let them get you down. You're stronger than you think. I took my wallet out of my bag to pay for the coffee and felt for the memory card from the camera. A small piece of plastic that might contain the proof of my innocence. I had to watch the recording as soon as possible. The rain was getting heavier, drumming on the cafe windows. I sat there, staring out the window, feeling completely crushed. My son-in-law had accused me of stealing family jewels in front of my grandchildren. My daughter hadn't stood up for me, and now I was sitting in a strange cafe, wet and alone, waiting for a stranger who had shown me more kindness than my own family. In my pocket was a memory card, my only hope of proving my innocence and perhaps revealing Mark's true colors. But now that seemed so distant and unreal. All I felt was the pain of betrayal and the cold of that rainy April morning, penetrating to the very core of my being. Mr. Davies arrived exactly 40 minutes later, as promised. I saw his old blue Ford pull up in front of the cafe and felt such relief that I almost cried. He came in, shaking the rain off his worn leather jacket, and spotted me right away. Tall, stooped, with a thick gray mustache and piercing blue eyes. He was the typical retired police officer who hadn't lost his professional observational skills. Eleanor, he said, approaching my table and giving me a quick, appraising look. You're soaked to the skin. I wasn't in the rain long, I replied, standing up. Thank you for coming, Mr. Davies. I don't know what I would have done. Don't mention it, he waved it off. I was going into town for a new garden hose anyway. Are you ready? I nodded and took out my wallet to pay for the coffee. I already paid, Mr. Davies said. Let's go. The car is warm. The car was warm. I buckled my seatbelt, put my bag on my lap, and only then allowed myself to relax a little. We drove onto the main street, heading out of town. So, Mr. Davies said, keeping his eyes on the road, what happened with your daughter? I took a deep breath. Where to start? How could I explain this whole ugly situation without making Sarah look bad? I've been accused of theft, I finally said. Mark, my son-in-law. He said I stole his mother's jewelry. Mr. Davies grunted but said nothing, waiting for me to continue. He made a scene in front of the children. He said he found his mother's ring in my jewelry box, but I've never seen that ring before. My voice trembled. And Sarah, she didn't say a word. She just stood there, letting him accuse me in front of her grandchildren. I see, Mr. Davies nodded. An unpleasant situation. What are you going to do? I clutched my bag tighter. I have proof. At least, I hope I do. Mr. Davies glanced at me, raising an eyebrow. Proof. I installed a camera in the guest room, I admitted, feeling a strange sense of relief at finally being able to tell someone. A small, inconspicuous one. It records to a memory card. I suspected something was wrong in the house when money went missing from my wallet last time. Mr. Davies smiled slightly under his mustache. Not bad for a beginner detective. What's on the recording? I don't know, I shook my head. I haven't looked yet. I need a computer. I have a laptop at home, he said. You can use it. We drove the rest of the way in silence. I looked at the suburbs rushing by, gradually giving way to rural landscapes, and thought about how quickly things that had taken years to build could be destroyed. Trust, respect. It all seemed so fragile now. Our neighborhood greeted us with the same rain, but not as heavy. Mr. Davies stopped in front of his house, a neat one-story building across the street from mine. Come on, he said, turning off the engine. Have some hot tea, dry your clothes, and then we'll watch your recording. I followed him down the wet driveway to the porch. Inside, Mr. Davies's house was just as I had imagined it. Simple, functional, a little old-fashioned. The furniture was sturdy, but not new. On the walls were photographs of Mr. Davies in his police uniform with other people, presumably colleagues. One was with a woman, probably his late wife, whom he sometimes mentioned. The bathroom is over there, he said, pointing to a door in the hallway. You'll find a towel. I'll put the kettle on. 15 minutes later, having changed into dry clothes from my bag and dried my hair with a towel, I was sitting at Mr. Davies's kitchen table with a cup of hot tea. He sat down opposite me, placing his open laptop between us. Now, let's see what you've got there, he said. I took the memory card out of my purse and handed it to him. My hands were shaking with excitement. What if the camera hadn't worked? What if Mark had found it and deleted the recording? What if I really looked like a paranoid old woman spying on her own family? Mr. Davies inserted the card into the laptop and clicked the mouse a few times. There are several files here, he said. They're dated. Which one do we need? Yesterday's, I think, I replied. I set up the camera on Saturday evening after talking to Mark. He nodded and opened the file. The screen went blank for a moment. Then an image of the guest room in Sarah's house appeared. The quality wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. I could see the bed, the bedside table, part of the wardrobe, and the door. There was no sound. I had forgotten to activate that feature. We'll have to fast forward, Mr. Davies said. There are several hours of footage here. He sped up the playback. Frames of an empty room flashed across the screen. Sometimes I appeared, combing my hair, reading a book, getting ready for bed. Stop, Mr. Davies said suddenly, slowing down the playback. Someone's coming in. I leaned forward, peering at the screen. Mark entered the room. He looked around, listened, then quickly walked over to my bag, which was standing by the bed. He began rummaging through it, looking increasingly annoyed. Then he stopped as if he had heard something and quickly left the room. That was yesterday afternoon, I said, when I was with the kids. Mr. Davies fast-forwarded the recording. Mark reappeared, but this time it was nighttime. Judging by the darkness outside the window and the night light that was on, I should have been asleep at that time. He looked around again, then walked over to the nightstand where my jewelry box was. He picked it up, examined the lock, then took something out of his pocket, a screwdriver or a knife, and started picking at the lock. I felt everything inside me go cold. This was it, the proof. Mark was breaking into my jewelry box. In the recording, he finally opened the box, quickly rummaged through the contents, then took a small object out of his pocket, a ring, and placed it among my jewelry. Then he closed the box, put it back in its place, and left the room. Oh my God, I whispered. He put the ring in my jewelry box. Looks like it, Mr. Davies nodded. Let's watch some more. The next interesting moment came in the early morning. Mark entered the room again, but this time he was not alone. Sarah was with him. They stood at the door and, judging by their gestures, were arguing. Sarah shook her head and tried to leave, but Mark grabbed her by the arm and said something, leaning close to her face. She cringed, nodded, and they both left. Too bad there's no sound, Mr. Davies said. But it's clear enough as it is. He's intimidating your daughter. I nodded silently, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. Poor Sarah. I should have realized sooner what was going on in her home. Wait. Mr. Davies paused the recording again. He's back. Sure enough, a few minutes later, Mark entered the room again, this time with a phone in his hand. He sat down on the edge of my bed and started talking on the phone, frequently glancing at the door. At one point, he stood up and paced around the room, gesturing wildly. It was clear that the conversation was unpleasant. Mark's face was contorted with anger, and he slammed his fist into his palm several times. It's a shame we don't know who he's talking to, I said. Yes, it's hard to tell without sound, Mr. Davies agreed. But it looks like he's talking to a creditor. These gestures, he pointed to the screen where Mark was making a gesture of counting money, usually mean a discussion about debt. I remembered my son-in-law's strange behavior in recent months, his nervousness, his conversations about finances. Do you think he has money problems? Quite possibly, Mr. Davies shrugged. And judging by his behavior, serious ones. We continued watching. Mark finished his phone call, sat for a few more minutes with his head in his hands, then abruptly stood up and left the room. The next significant moment was in the morning. I recognized the early morning light outside the window. Sarah entered the room with a cup of tea. She placed it on the nightstand, looked around, then walked over to my bag. She hesitated, as if struggling with herself, then quickly opened it and put something inside. A note. Then she left just as quickly. What did she put in my bag? I strained to make out the blurry writing. I can't see, Mr. Davies shook his head. Something small. Check your bag. I quickly opened my bag and began rummaging through its contents. Nothing unusual. Clothes, toiletries, a book. Wait. I took out the book I had brought with me on the trip, a well-worn Agatha Christie detective novel. A folded piece of paper fell out. Here. I unfolded the note. It was Sarah's handwriting, small and uneven, as if she had written it in a hurry. Mom, I'm sorry. Mark is in big debt because of gambling. He's threatening to take the kids if I don't help him. I'm scared for them. Please be careful. Don't trust him. So, that's what it is, Mr. Davies said quietly, reading the note over my shoulder. Gambling. Poor Sarah, I said, pressing the note to my chest. She's afraid of him. Afraid for the children. Mr. Davies returned to the laptop and continued watching. The last fragment of the recording showed Mark entering the room again, this time with the clear intention of searching it thoroughly. He checked all the drawers, looked under the bed, and even rummaged through the books on the shelf where the camera was hidden. For a moment, I held my breath. He was about to find it. But Mark was apparently in a hurry and didn't notice the small device. He continued his search, becoming increasingly irritated, and finally, finding nothing of interest, left the room, slamming the door behind him. That was where the recording ended. I leaned back in my chair, stunned by what I had seen. Now it's clear what happened, Mr. Davies said, closing the file. Your son-in-law is in debt because of gambling. He needs money urgently, so he decided to get rid of you by accusing you of theft. Maybe he was counting on the insurance money from the jewelry, or just wanted to divert suspicion from himself. But why involve the children? I still couldn't understand Mark's cruelty. Why did he have to humiliate me in front of them? To convince everyone of your guilt, Mr. Davies explained. Children are sincere. If they didn't believe you were capable of theft, they might have defended you or asked uncomfortable questions. Mark needed to turn them against you. I remembered my grandchildren's faces, frightened, confused, their eyes filled with tears. Mark had taken away not only their grandmother, but also their belief that those closest to them were always honest and kind. What am I supposed to do now, Mr. Davies? I asked, feeling completely lost. I have the recording. But who would believe an old woman accusing her son-in-law of forgery? Mr. Davies stroked his mustache thoughtfully. The police are unlikely to get involved in a family dispute without clear evidence of violence, he said. But the recording is a good start. We need more information about Mark's debts. Who does he owe? How much? How serious are his problems? I don't know, I shook my head. Sarah never mentioned any financial difficulties. On the contrary, Mark always boasted about how well they were doing. Typical of gamblers, Mr. Davies snorted. Maintaining the appearance of prosperity until the very end. And your daughter's note confirms that he's threatening her and the children. That's serious. I reread Sarah's note. I'm afraid for them. What exactly did she mean? Physical violence? Or the threat of taking away her parental rights? In any case, my daughter and grandchildren were in danger, and I was sitting here on the other side of town, helpless and confused. We have to go back, I said firmly. Show Sarah the note. Convince her to leave Mark and take the children with her. Mr. Davies shook his head. Not so fast, Eleanor. If Mark really owes dangerous people a lot of money, a direct confrontation could be dangerous. We need a plan. What plan? I was starting to lose my patience. Every hour my grandchildren spend with that man could be dangerous for them. I understand your concern, Mr. Davies said gently. But let's think rationally. If we just barge in there with accusations, Mark will deny everything. He'll say the recording is fake, that you made it all up out of revenge. And Sarah, I'm afraid she might not support you publicly if she's afraid for the children. I had to admit he was right. Sarah had already shown that her fear of her husband was stronger than her love and respect for her mother. We couldn't count on her suddenly finding the strength to stand up to him. What do you suggest? I asked, trying to calm down. Mr. Davies stood up and paced around the kitchen, clearly thinking things over. First, we need to make a copy of this recording, he said. Just in case. Second, find out more about Mark's financial situation. I have a friend in the police who can discreetly find out if your son-in-law has any connections to underground gambling establishments. And in the meantime, Sarah and the children are staying with him? I remarked bitterly. Yes, but we'll move quickly, Mr. Davies assured me. And one more thing, you need to contact Sarah. Let her know that you have evidence of his innocence and that you're willing to help. How? I spread my hands. Mark probably controls all her communications. Phone, mail. There are ways, Mr. Davies said thoughtfully. For example, through her work. She still works at Chesapeake Hospital, right? I nodded. She's a nurse in the pediatric ward, 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Great, Mr. Davies smiled. So, she'll be there tomorrow. We could go and meet her during her lunch break, somewhere public where Mark can't interfere. The plan was starting to take shape, and I felt hope returning. Maybe all was not lost. Maybe I could regain my grandchildren's trust and help my daughter get out of this terrible situation. Thank you, Mr. Davies, I said sincerely. I don't know what I would do without you. He waved his hand dismissively. It's nothing. Neighbors should help each other. Besides, he added with a slight smile, I worked in the police for 30 years. Sometimes I miss investigating. I smiled back for the first time in this long, difficult day. Then let's make a plan. What do we need to do before tomorrow? Mr. Davies returned to the table and opened a new file on his laptop. First, copy the recording and save it somewhere safe. Second, I'll call my friend at the police department and discreetly ask about Mark. Third, we need to prepare for the conversation with Sarah. Decide exactly what we're going to tell her and how we're going to convince her to act. I nodded, mentally adding another item to the list. Prepare for the meeting with the grandchildren. I had to find a way to explain what had happened without completely destroying their image of their family and their trust. We spent several hours working out a plan. Mr. Davies was methodical and thorough, as befits a former police officer. He considered all possible scenarios, calculated the risks, and suggested alternative solutions. I listened, asked questions, and sometimes argued. But overall, I trusted his experience. By evening, we had a clear plan of action for the next few days. The first step was to meet with Sarah at the hospital. Then, depending on her reaction, we would either help her and the children escape from Mark or gather more evidence of his machinations and go to the police. We need to be prepared for the possibility that Sarah may not want our help, Mr. Davies warned. Victims of domestic violence often defend their abusers, especially when there are children involved. I know, I sighed. But I have proof. She has to believe me. Let's hope so, he nodded. Now you need to rest. It's been a tough day. I suddenly felt exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The events of the day weighed heavily on me. And all I wanted to do was lie down and forget everything. But thoughts of my grandchildren, who were still with Mark, wouldn't leave me alone. I'll walk you home, Mr. Davies said, noticing my condition. The rain has almost stopped. Thank you. But I live across the street, I smiled weakly. I'll be fine. Still, he insisted. Take my umbrella, just in case. We stepped out onto the porch. It was getting dark. The rain had indeed almost stopped, with only a few drops falling here and there. The air was fresh, smelling of wet earth and blossoming leaves. Spring was coming after all, despite everything. We crossed the street in silence. My house looked quiet and dark, as if waiting for its mistress to return. I took out my keys, but before opening the door, I turned to Mr. Davies. Thank you for everything. I don't know how to express my gratitude. He looked slightly embarrassed, shifting from one foot to the other. Don't thank me, Eleanor. Just get some rest. Tomorrow is an important day. I nodded, suddenly feeling a lump in my throat. It was strange how a stranger had shown more concern and understanding than my own family. Although perhaps Mr. Davies wasn't such a stranger anymore. We had been neighbors for over 10 years, exchanging pleasantries and occasionally helping each other with small things. But it was only today that I truly appreciated his presence in my life. See you tomorrow, I said, opening the door. See you tomorrow, he nodded. Call me if you need anything anytime. As I entered the house, I immediately smelled something familiar. Old wood, books, lavender, which I had placed in the closets. Everything here was familiar, safe, and yet for the first time in many years, the house seemed too empty, too quiet. I walked into the living room without turning on the lights. I sat down in the armchair by the window, the one Arthur used to love to sit in while reading the evening paper. Now I needed his advice and support more than ever. What would you do, Arthur? I whispered into the emptiness. How would you protect Sarah and the children? Of course, there was no answer, only the ticking of the old clock on the wall and the patter of rain outside the window. But for some reason, I was sure that Arthur would have approved of our plan. He had always been in favor of decisive action, especially when it came to family. I took the jewelry box out of my bag and opened it. I sorted through the familiar items. My grandmother's silver bracelet, my mother's pearl brooch, earrings from Arthur, and the ring that didn't belong to me, planted by Mark. It looked out of place among my modest treasures. Too new, too shiny, probably bought recently, specifically for this setup. Tomorrow, I'd see Sarah. I'd show her the recording. I'd explain that I was ready to help, that she wasn't alone. We'd get the children and get away from Mark before it was too late. And if she refused, well, then I'd have to go to Plan B, gather more evidence against Mark, and go to the police. I couldn't let him ruin my daughter's life and my grandchildren's lives. With these thoughts in mind, I finally made my way up to the bedroom, feeling exhausted. Tomorrow would be a new day, a day when I would start fighting for my family. Monday morning dawned sunny, as if nature had decided to make up for yesterday's rain. I woke up early, before 6, with a heavy heart but with determination. Today, everything had to change. After showering and getting dressed, I chose my clothes more carefully than usual. A dark blue dress with a jacket, a little makeup, and the pearl earrings Arthur had given me. I wanted to look composed and confident, not the broken old woman they had seen yesterday. At 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Mr. Davies, punctual as always, stood on the doorstep in his usual leather jacket, but today he was wearing a tie, which gave him a particularly formal appearance. Good morning, Eleanor, he nodded. Are you ready? As ready as I can be, I replied, picking up my bag containing my laptop with my notes and the documents we had gathered the day before. The drive to town took about 40 minutes. We rode in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I looked at the passing scenery and thought about how my life had changed in just 2 days. On Saturday, I was just an elderly widow visiting her daughter and grandchildren. Today, I was driving to rescue them from the man they called their husband and father. Did you manage to contact your friend in the police? I asked, breaking the silence. Mr. Davies nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. Yes, I called him last night. Mark Price is well known in certain circles. He owes money to several underground casinos and a local loan shark named Kane. Kane? I breathed, my mind racing. How much? My friend doesn't know the exact amount, but it appears to be several tens of thousands of dollars. I gasped. The amount seemed astronomical. Asterisk, how could he? They have children, a mortgage, asterisk, gambling addiction defies logic, Mr. Davies replied grimly. People lose everything, their homes, their families, their jobs, and still keep gambling, hoping for a big win that will fix everything. We pulled up to Chesapeake City Hospital, an imposing glass and concrete building. Mr. Davies parked in the visitor lot. It's 9:30, he said, checking his watch. If I understand correctly, the nurse's lunch break starts at noon. Yes, I nodded. Sarah usually eats in the cafeteria on the first floor. She only has 30 minutes, so we need to be concise. Okay. Mr. Davies thought for a moment. Then here's the plan. First, you go alone. Find Sarah and ask her if she can spare some time during her lunch break. If she agrees, great. If not, or if she seems scared, I'll come over and introduce myself. An official appearance sometimes helps. I agreed. Mr. Davies did look impressive with his gray mustache and piercing gaze, especially today with his tie and police veteran badge on his lapel. The wait was agonizing. We sat in the hospital lobby, reviewing yesterday's notes and discussing our conversation strategy. Finally, the clock struck 11:45, and I headed for the elevators to go up to the pediatric ward. The hospital corridors were filled with the usual hustle and bustle: doctors, nurses, patients, visitors. I walked, trying to look confident, although inside I was a bundle of nerves. What if Sarah refused to talk to me? What if Mark had already turned her against me completely? The pediatric ward greeted me with bright drawings on the walls and children's laughter from the playroom. I approached the nurse's station where a young nurse was writing something in a logbook. Excuse me, I'm looking for Sarah Price, I said. Is she on duty today? The nurse looked up and smiled. Yes, she's in the treatment room. She should be free soon. Are you her mother? She looked me over surprisingly. You look like her. Yes, I said, feeling a strange pride at her words. Despite everything that had happened, Sarah was still my daughter, my flesh and blood. I'll wait for her here, if I may. Of course, the nurse nodded. Have a seat. Or should I call her if it's urgent? No, I'll wait, I replied hastily. The last thing I needed was to draw attention to our meeting. I sat down on one of the plastic chairs in the hallway and prepared to wait. 10 minutes later, the door to the treatment room opened and Sarah emerged, holding the hand of a little boy with a bandage on his elbow. She led him to his room, saying something affectionate, then turned and froze when she saw me. Her face paled, her eyes widened in surprise. And fear? She quickly looked around, as if checking to see if anyone was following her, then walked quickly over to me. Mom, she whispered. What are you doing here? I stood up, feeling my knees tremble. We need to talk, Sarah. It's important. She looked around again, nervously, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture I remembered from her childhood. I can't. Mark isn't here, I said firmly. And we're going to talk about him. About what he did. Sarah bit her lip, clearly struggling with herself. I have lunch in 15 minutes, she finally said. Meet me in the cafeteria on the first floor, the table in the far corner by the window. Okay, I nodded. And Sarah, I have a friend with me, a former police officer. He wants to help. She flinched but nodded. Okay, just be careful. Mark sometimes shows up unannounced. When I went down to the cafeteria, I found Mr. Davies already sitting at a table in the corner. There were 2 cups of coffee in front of him. She's coming, I said, sitting down across from him. In 15 minutes. Mr. Davies nodded, not showing any surprise. Okay, what does she look like? Scared, I replied honestly. And she seems afraid that Mark might show up here. Is that possible? She said he sometimes comes by unannounced. Mr. Davies frowned. Then we need to be ready to act fast. Did you bring your laptop? I nodded, patting my bag. And all the documents, too. Exactly 15 minutes later, Sarah entered the cafeteria. She had changed out of her medical uniform and was wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked tired and tense. When she saw us, she froze for a moment, then walked decisively toward our table. Hi, Mom, she said quietly, sitting down next to me. Then she turned to Mr. Davies. You must be the friend Mom was talking about. Mr. Davies, he said, extending his hand. Nice to meet you, although the circumstances aren't the most pleasant. Sarah shook his hand cautiously, then turned to me. I only have 25 minutes. What's going on, Mom? I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. Sarah, I know the truth about Mark. About his debts. About the ring he planted. About everything. Her eyes widened, and she turned even paler. What are you talking about? I have proof, I interrupted, opening my bag and taking out my laptop. I set up a camera in the guest room, and it recorded Mark putting the ring in my jewelry box. Sarah stared at me as if she couldn't believe her ears. You what? See for yourself, I said, opening my laptop and playing the recording. Right here. See? He comes into the room at night, picks the lock on the box, and puts the ring inside. Sarah stared at the screen, unable to look away, her hands resting on the table, clenched into fists so tightly that her knuckles turned white. And here, I continued, switching to another clip. He's talking on the phone. Judging by the tone, it's with a creditor. Mr. Davies thinks it's about gambling debts. Kane, Sarah whispered, her eyes glued to the screen. His name is Kane. He lends money at exorbitant interest rates. And if he doesn't pay him back on time... She fell silent, covering her face with her hands. I put my hand on her shoulder, feeling her tremble. Sarah, sweetheart, why didn't you tell me? I could have helped. How? She asked bitterly, lowering her hands. Tears glistened on her cheeks. By giving him your savings? Selling the house? That wouldn't solve the problem. Mark would just lose that money, too. He can't stop. What about your note? I took out the folded piece of paper I had found in the book. You wrote that he threatened to take the children away. Is that true? Sarah nodded, wiping away her tears. He says that if I leave or seek help, he'll prove that I'm a bad mother, that I work too much and don't pay enough attention to the children, that he'll fight for full custody and won't let me see them. Those are empty threats, Mr. Davies interjected. The court takes many factors into account, including financial stability, and your husband, from what I understand, has serious debts and a gambling addiction. No judge would give the children to a father with such problems. Sarah looked at him, hopefully. Are you sure? Absolutely. Mr. Davies nodded. I have friends in the police department. They confirmed that your husband is known in certain circles. Debt, gambling, possibly even embezzlement at work. He's not the kind of man a court would trust with children. Sarah began to cry again, but now it seemed to be out of relief. I was so afraid, she whispered, so scared of losing Ben and Lily. They're all I have. You have me, I said quietly, squeezing her hand. And I'll never let Mark take your children away from you. Never. We sat in silence for several minutes. Sarah tried to collect her thoughts, and I gave her time. Finally, she straightened up and looked at me, more determinedly. What should I do, Mom? Where should I go? I don't have money for a lawyer or a new place to live. Don't worry about that, I said. I have savings, and my house is big enough for all of you. The most important thing right now is to get the kids and get away from Mark. But how? He'll be home from work at 6. The kids are at school until 3. Mr. Davies stroked his mustache thoughtfully. Here's the plan. You finish work at 4, Sarah replied. Excellent. At 3, Eleanor and I will pick up the children from school. Then we'll go to your house and gather the most essential things. At 4, we'll meet you here and we'll all go to Eleanor's house together. What if Mark comes back early? Sarah asked anxiously. That's unlikely, Mr. Davies said. But even if he does, we have proof of his shady dealings. And I'm a former police officer. Trust me, he'll think twice before causing any trouble. Sarah looked uncertain, but nodded. All right, I agree. But we need to act quickly. Mark has an app on his phone that tracks my movements. If I don't go home after work, he might suspect something's wrong. Then leave your phone here in the locker, Mr. Davies suggested. Or with a colleague you trust. Tell them you forgot to charge it and borrow another one for emergencies. That's fine, Sarah nodded. I have a friend, Sarah. She'll help. Great. I felt a warm glow of hope spread through me. Then it's settled. We'll pick up the kids at 3, then go to your place to get your things, and meet here at 4. Sarah suddenly squeezed my hand. Mom, I feel so guilty. What happened yesterday? I should have stood up for you. I should have told the kids the truth. I'm such a coward. No, sweetie. I stroked her cheek like I used to when she was little. You're not a coward. You're a mother who fears for her children. I understand that. And I don't hold it against you. Sarah clung to my hand, closing her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. I don't deserve a mother like you. You do, I said firmly. And you deserve even more. Now go to work. I'll meet you at 4. She nodded, stood up, hugged me tightly for a moment, then quickly left the cafeteria, wiping her eyes. She's strong, Mr. Davies remarked when we were alone. She'll be fine. Of course she will, I nodded. She's my daughter. The next few hours were spent in tense anticipation. Mr. Davies and I discussed the details of the plan and prepared the documents we might need if Mark decided to go to the police. At 2:30, we drove to the school where Ben and Lily attended. Elmwood Elementary was a typical one-story building with brightly colored walls and a playground. We parked nearby and waited. At 3 o'clock, the bell rang, and the children began to file out in groups, talking loudly and laughing. I was the first to spot Ben and Lily. They were walking hand in hand, both with backpacks on their backs. Ben was serious and focused as always, while Lily was bouncing along. At the sight of my grandchildren, my heart ached with tenderness and pain. How would they react to my appearance after yesterday? I got out of the car and waved to them. Ben noticed me first and stopped, holding his sister back. A whole range of emotions flashed across his face: surprise, embarrassment, uncertainty. Grandma. Lily spotted me and broke free from her brother's grip, running toward me. Grandma, you're back. She hugged my legs, pressing herself against me. I bent down and hugged her back, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. Of course, I'm back, sweetheart. I promised I'd prove my innocence. Remember? Ben approached more slowly, still unsure. Dad said you weren't coming back, he said quietly. He said you. I know what he said, I replied gently. But it's not true, Ben. And I have proof. Do you want to see it? He nodded, still not looking me in the eyes. Then get in the car, I said, pointing to Mr. Davies's vehicle. I'll explain everything on the way. Where are we going? Lily asked, still holding my hand. Does Dad know? We're going to your house to get your things, I replied honestly. And then to mine. You'll be staying with me for a while. And no, Dad doesn't know yet. But Mom agrees. We just spoke to her. Ben frowned, clearly confused by what was happening, but obediently got into the car. Mr. Davies introduced himself, trying to look as friendly as possible, which wasn't easy with his stern appearance. On the way to Sarah's house, I showed the children some excerpts from the recording. Only the parts where Mark puts the ring in the box. I decided they were too young to know about their father's debts and his threats to their mother. See, I said when the recording ended. Dad put the ring in my box and then accused me of stealing it. But why? Lily asked, puzzled. Dad said stealing is wrong. Why did he do it himself? Sometimes adults do the wrong thing, I replied cautiously. Especially when they have problems. What kind of problems? Asked Ben, who seemed to understand more than he was saying. Adult problems, I replied evasively. The important thing is that I've never taken anything that didn't belong to me. And I'll never lie to you. I promise. We pulled up to Sarah's house. It looked the same as always, a neat cottage with a trimmed lawn. It was hard to believe that such terrible secrets were hidden behind this facade of prosperity. Do you have a key? Mr. Davies asked, stopping the car. I shook my head. No, but the kids should have one. I have one, Ben confirmed, taking a key on a lanyard out of his backpack. Mom gives it to me when we come home from school before her. We entered the house. Everything looked normal, clean, tidy. No trace of the drama that had unfolded here yesterday. Okay, kids, I said firmly. We need to gather your things. Just the essentials: clothes, school supplies, favorite toys. Everything should fit in one suitcase per person. They nodded and ran to their rooms. I followed them, helping them choose what to take and leave behind. Mr. Davies went to Sarah's bedroom to gather her things. We decided it would be quicker that way. Half an hour later, we had 3 suitcases, one for Ben, one for Lily, and one for Sarah. I added a few more family photos, some documents I found in Sarah's desk drawer, and a laptop that might contain important information. All done, Mr. Davies said, loading the suitcases into the car. Now we have to get to the hospital by 4 o'clock. We were just about to leave when a familiar black pickup truck pulled into the driveway. My heart sank. Mark. He was back early. It's Dad. Lily exclaimed, looking out the window. Mr. Davies made a split-second decision. Kids, get in the car, quick, he commanded. Eleanor, you too. I'll talk to him. No, I said firmly. I have to be here. This is my family. Mr. Davies wanted to argue, but when he saw the look on my face, he just nodded. All right, but you kids get in the car. Ben and Lily, frightened and confused, obediently got into the car. Mr. Davies and I stepped out onto the porch just as Mark climbed out of the pickup truck. When he saw us, he froze for a moment, then his face contorted with rage. What the hell are you doing here? He barked, heading toward us. I told you yesterday, get out of my house. This is my daughter's house, I replied calmly, though I was trembling inside. And her children's, and I came to pick them up. Mark laughed, an unpleasant, evil laugh. Take them? Where? They're my family. Mine. He took another step toward the porch, but Mr. Davies stepped forward. Mr. Price, he said in a formal tone. I'm Mr. Davies, a former police officer. We have evidence of your slander against Mrs. Miller, as well as information about your debts to Kane and several underground casinos. I suggest you step aside and let us leave peacefully. Mark paled at the mention of Kane's name. Who the hell are you, and how do you know? That's not important, Mr. Davies interrupted. What's important is that your wife and children are leaving, temporarily, until you sort out your problems. Sarah? Mark looked around as if expecting to see his wife. Where is she? What did you tell her? The truth, I replied. About how you planted the ring in my jewelry box. About how you threatened to take the children away if she left you. About your debts. Nonsense, he spat, but his voice trembled. You have no proof. I do, I said, taking my laptop out of my bag and opening it. The camera in the guest room, the recording of you breaking into my jewelry box and planting the ring, the recording of your conversation with the creditor. It's all there, Mark. He stared at the screen, his face showing his realization of defeat. Anger gave way to fear, then despair. You don't understand, he said in a different tone. These people, they're not kidding. If I don't get the money back, that's your problem, Mr. Price, Mr. Davies said. But blackmailing your mother-in-law and threatening your wife is not the answer. Now we're leaving, and I advise you not to try to stop us. Mark stood with his shoulders slumped, looking at us and then at the car where the children were sitting. For a moment, I even felt sorry for him, a broken man who had lost everything because of his own weakness. Can I at least say goodbye to the kids? He asked quietly. I glanced at Mr. Davies. He nodded slightly. No drama, I warned. And in our presence. Mark nodded and slowly walked toward the car. Ben rolled down the window, looking at his father warily. Hi, champ, Mark said, trying to smile. Hi, princess, he added, noticing Lily in the back seat. Dad, we're going to Grandma's, Lily said. Are you coming too? Mark shook his head, swallowing hard. No, sweetheart. Daddy has to take care of some things. But I'll come see you soon, okay? You promise? She asked hopefully. I promise, he said, looking over at Ben, who was silent. Take care of your sister, okay, champ? Ben nodded slowly, still not saying a word. It was clear how hard it was for him to realize that his father had lied, betrayed his grandmother, and now they were leaving him. We have to go, I said, approaching the car. Sarah is waiting for us at the hospital. Mark stepped back, allowing me to get into the car. Mr. Davies got into the driver's seat and started the engine. Don't try to follow us or threaten us, he warned Mark through the rolled-down window. My friend in the police has a copy of all the evidence. One phone call, and you'll have problems worse than your dad's. Mark nodded silently, his hands in his pockets. As we drove away, I saw him in the rearview mirror, standing on the driveway, watching us go, a lonely figure against the house he might soon lose. The children were silent on the way to the hospital, each lost in their own thoughts. Lily pressed herself against me, resting her head on my shoulder. Ben sat upright, staring out the window with a blank expression. "Everything will be okay," I said quietly, hugging my granddaughter. "I promise." We arrived at the hospital at exactly 4 o'clock. Sarah was already waiting for us at the entrance, shifting nervously from foot to foot. When she saw the car, she ran over and got into the back seat, hugging the children. "My little ones," she whispered, kissing them one by one. "Are you okay?" "Yes, Mom," Ben replied. We packed our things and we saw Dad. Sarah froze. "Dad? Was he home?" "He came back just as we were leaving," I explained. "But everything's fine." We showed him the recording, and he didn't interfere. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank God." I was so scared. "It's all over," Mr. Davies said as he pulled out of the hospital parking lot. "Now let's go home to Eleanor's. We'll discuss what to do next there." The drive to my house took about 40 minutes. The whole time, Sarah held on to the children as if afraid they would disappear. They told her about school, what they had brought with them, their plans for the evening. The usual children's chatter, which now sounded especially precious. My old house on Elm Street greeted us with the setting sun gilding the windows. How strange. Just yesterday, I had returned here alone, crushed and humiliated. Today I had brought my family here, my daughter and grandchildren who were about to start a new life. "Welcome," I said, opening the door. "Make yourselves comfortable." The children entered first, looking around curiously. They had been here before, but not often and never stayed long. "Ben, your room will be upstairs, first door on the right," I said. "It was your mother's room when she was little. And you, Lily, will sleep in the room next door. It's my sewing room now, but we'll fix it up quickly." "And me?" Sarah asked, carrying in a suitcase. "The guest room is downstairs," I replied. "There's a comfortable sofa bed. If you want, we can look for an apartment closer to your work." "No," she shook her head. "We'll stay here for now, if you don't mind. The children need stability, and so do I." Mr. Davies carried in the remaining suitcases and stopped at the door. "I think I'll go," he said. "You need time to be together, to settle in." "Stay for dinner," I offered. "It's the least I can do to thank you." He hesitated, but Sarah backed up the invitation. "Please, Mr. Davies. We couldn't have done it without you." "All right," he agreed. "But just dinner." The evening passed in a strange but cozy atmosphere. Sarah and I prepared dinner while the children explored the house, finding old toys and books that had been around since their mother was a little girl. Mr. Davies sat in the living room, answering phone calls from time to time. He was contacting his friends in the police to make sure Mark wasn't taking any action against us. Over dinner, simple but hearty roast, salad, apple pie, we talked about the future. About how Ben and Lily would continue going to the same school for now. Sarah would drive them on her way to work. About finding a good lawyer to handle the divorce and custody agreement. About how I could help with the down payment if Sarah decided to buy her own place. "Mom, I can't accept this money," Sarah objected when the children had gone to play and we were left at the table with our tea. "You can and you will," I said firmly. "This isn't a gift. It's an investment in your future, in my grandchildren's future." Mr. Davies, who had been listening to our conversation, nodded. "Your mother is right, Sarah. Besides, I think you should go to court, not only for a divorce, but also for compensation. If Mark really lost the family money, you're entitled to compensation." "I'm afraid there's nothing to compensate," she said with a bitter smile. "All our savings are long gone. The house is mortgaged and remortgaged. Even my salary, part of it went to pay off debts." "Nevertheless," said Mr. Davies, "you need a good lawyer. I have a friend who specializes in cases like this. I can put you in touch with him." "Thank you," said Sarah sincerely. "For everything. I don't know how we'll manage." She was interrupted by the doorbell. We all froze, looking at each other. "Who could be coming at this hour?" "I'll get it," Mr. Davies said, getting up. "You stay here." He went into the hallway. Sarah and I listened intently. Voices, muffled conversation, then footsteps returning to the dining room. "It's Officer Miller," Mr. Davies said, entering with a young policeman from the department. "He has news about Mark." Officer Miller, a blond man in his 30s, nodded to us. Mrs. Price, he said to Sarah, I need to inform you that your husband, Mark Price, was arrested an hour ago for assaulting a creditor named Howard Kane. Mr. Kane is in the hospital with a concussion and a broken jaw. Your husband is at the station, charged with aggravated assault. Sarah turned pale and pressed her hand to her mouth. My God, she whispered. He's completely lost his mind. We also found an unregistered firearm in his pickup truck, Officer Miller continued. So, there will be more charges. Given the severity of the crime and his previous convictions for fighting, he will most likely receive a significant sentence. Previous convictions? I asked, looking at Sarah. Did you know? She shook her head. No, he never. God, how could I have been so blind? Officer Miller continued. Mr. Price asked us to tell you that he won't be seeking custody of the children and agrees to a divorce on your terms. He also asked us to apologize to you, Mrs. Miller. He turned to me. For the false accusations. I nodded, not knowing what to say. It was a strange feeling to receive an apology through a police officer from a man who had publicly humiliated me in front of my grandchildren just yesterday. What happens next? Sarah asked in a trembling voice. Court, Officer Miller replied. You will be called as a witness. The children will probably be questioned too, but in a sensitive manner with a psychologist present. Mr. Price is facing 5 to 10 years, considering all the circumstances. After the officer left, we sat in silence for a long time. Sarah cried quietly, as if mourning not only her broken marriage, but all the years she had spent in fear and deception. I have to tell the children, she finally said. They have a right to know. Not today, I said gently. Give them time to settle in here. Tomorrow or the day after will be enough time for difficult conversations. Mr. Davies nodded in agreement. Your mother is right. Right now, the children need peace and a sense of security. Everything else can wait. Sarah wiped away her tears and nodded. You're right. First, we need to get settled. Start a new life, I said, taking her hand. And we'll manage. Together. Mr. Davies left around 10 o'clock, promising to stop by tomorrow to help with the paperwork and contact a lawyer. Sarah and I put the children to bed, read them a story. Lily insisted on this ritual, and finally sat down together in the living room. Mom, Sarah said quietly, looking at me with pain and remorse. I'll never be able to make up for what I did, the way I betrayed you yesterday. You've already made up for it, I replied, sitting down next to her on the sofa. By finding the strength to leave, by protecting the children, by choosing the truth, even though it was scary. I should have done it sooner, she shook her head. Before he accused you, before he started threatening you, before he lost all our savings. Don't beat yourself up, I said, hugging her shoulders. What's done is done. What matters is that we're together now, and no matter what happens, it will always be that way. Sarah clung to me like she did when she was a child, when she was afraid of a thunderstorm or a scary dream. Promise? I promise. I kissed her on the top of her head. Now go to sleep. Tomorrow is the start of a new life. When everyone had gone to bed, I sat in the living room for a long time, looking at the family photos on the walls. Arthur, young and smiling, with little Sarah in his arms. Sarah in her prom dress. Me with newborn Ben in the maternity ward. Lily on her first bike. My family. No matter what, she was with me again. And even though there were many difficulties ahead, court, divorce, rebuilding my grandchildren's trust, we would get through it together. In the bedroom, getting ready for bed, I glanced one last time at the jewelry box on the dresser, the small wooden box that had unwittingly caused all these events. Inside was still the ring Mark had slipped into it, a silent witness to his desperation and meanness. Tomorrow, I would give it to the police as evidence. But today I was just grateful that the truth had prevailed, that my daughter and grandchildren were back with me, for the fact that, even at 65, it is possible to start a new chapter in life. With these thoughts, I went to bed, feeling at peace for the first time in a long time. Lily was snoring quietly behind the wall. And in the room opposite, Ben was probably reading under the covers with a flashlight, his favorite pastime. Downstairs, Sarah was probably still crying, mourning the past, but already looking to the future with hope. My family, my fortress. Whatever happens next, we've already survived the worst, and we've become stronger.